Okay, let's talk about the drawbacks of pesticides. Pesticides can reduce the quality of the soil. When you're spraying these chemicals, they can accumulate in the soil and just kind of degrade the quality, leading to smaller plants. Number two, and this is a very significant concern in my opinion, is creating pesticide resistant organisms. As we use more and more pesticides and stronger pesticides, we are creating populations of pests that are almost predominantly resistant to a particular pesticide. And if you look at the diagram over here, we talked about this as we talked about adaptations and population dynamics over time. With each generation, as the pesticide works on the non-resistant ones, you're basically going to create an army of superbugs. And our only solution right now for dealing with this is to use stronger and stronger pesticides, okay, which is not a good solution. I think everyone would agree on that. Another drawback of pesticides is they contaminate the air. In order to apply them as quickly and easily as possible, I'm sure you've seen planes like this that are just spraying down pesticides on crops, or even just a large tractor that's spraying, a whole many rows of crops at the same time. In this case, particularly the case of the airplane, a large amount of the pesticide is going to be wasted, or it's going to go off target and perhaps harm something that was not even a pest to begin with. Workers themselves are oftentimes put in an unideal position because they are the ones sometimes applying these pesticides. So that really can affect their health. In addition, pesticides, as again, we're spraying them everywhere, they can contaminate the water supply. When something gets into the water supply of an ecosystem, water is going to percolate and trickle into every part of that ecosystem. So if something gets into the water significantly, you can be sure it's going to get into every corner of an ecosystem and every organism eventually. So the toxin is going to then affect every level up the food chain. And this is where we're going to talk about this idea of biomagnification in just a bit. Here you can see they're using DDT, which is possibly a pesticide you've heard of. If you haven't heard of it, we are going to be talking about DDT and Rachel Carson after a spring break. This biomagnification is this whole idea that high-level predators are going to be endangered. Let me actually go back to this picture. There we go. So in the smaller organisms like the producers, you're going to have low levels of the toxin, whether it's DDT or some other pesticide. But as you move up the food chain, the concentration of the toxin is going to get higher and higher. Here's why. If you're looking at this fish, which is eating all these little fish, it's accumulating all of that toxin that this fish has, and this one, and this one, and this one, and this one, and that one. Okay? And obviously this is going to eat many small fish, so it's going to accumulate a lot more of that toxin than these individual fishes have alone. Then if we move up another step, our tertiary consumer, our bird of prey here, is going to most likely eat many of these large fish over the course of its life. So all the toxin from all these multiple large fishes are then going to go into this organism's body, and it's going to basically magnify the toxin as you move up the food chain. So anything really can be toxic when you think about it. It's just at what level. There's some sort of threshold that's going to make it have impacts. And typically when we get this high up a food chain, this is when whatever toxin we're talking about is going to have impacts. Now DDT affected the shells of large birds. So basically their shells became so thin because of the effects of the DDT that they could not reproduce. They would actually crush their own eggs, just trying to sit on them and roost on them. So DDT, as we'll talk about, has been banned in a lot of countries. But again, just trying to give you a whole picture. So DDT being banned here allowed some birds, like bald eagles that were becoming endangered, to then revive their population. However, those countries that we talked about that had malaria as a significant source of illness, malaria was very low in numbers whenever DDT was being used in those countries. When it was banned, then the malaria cases skyrocketed. So it's all about cause and effect and what is the most ideal situation given everything that you can take into account. Okay, let's put in the drawbacks of pesticides. Number one, they can reduce the soil quality. And these are typically with pesticides that take a long time to break down. Now we are trying to make newer pesticides that break down fairly rapidly. Therefore, they can't accumulate in the soil or in these high-level predators to such high degree. Number two, this is, again, I think this is one of the most concerning aspects. More pesticide-resistant organisms are going to emerge the longer we use pesticides. Number three, air and water contamination. And number four, the killing of these high-level predators, or these, organisms up the food chain. And again, that process is called biomagnification. So let's get this in as a definition. Biomagnification is the concentration of toxins in organisms at successively higher levels in the food chain. This is the same with mercury when we're talking about fish, the fish like tuna, that you don't want to necessarily eat a whole lot of because of the same exact concept, bioaccumulation of mercury as little fish are being eaten by successively larger fish. And here's kind of a diagram of DDT, but like I said, this would apply to mercury. As you can see, the concentration gets higher and higher. So down here, a concentration of this much might have no effect. But again, it's all the ripple effect. Okay, so there are some alternative methods of pest control. None of them is as cheap or as efficient as pesticides yet, but we're hoping that will change. If you're talking about a small scale farm, mechanical control, meaning a farm worker is actually physically removing the pest by hand, that's effective. It doesn't require chemicals, but it takes a lot of time, and then obviously time is money, so it's going to cost you both those things. Number two, biological control is another alternative to pesticide use. And what we mean by that is doing something like adding natural predators that will eat the undesirable bugs. In this case, this is a good example of biological control. We have a ladybug that is eating an aphid. Okay, aphids are these little tiny creatures that can ruin a whole lot of crops, but instead of spraying chemicals, this farmer decided to just release a bunch of ladybugs to eat those guys up, and that's actually pretty effective as well. The one drawback, there's probably a few, but the one main one that comes to mind is possibly upsetting the ecological balance by introducing a species. This is how some invasive species got started. We know like ladybugs are not invasive, so that was a pretty good choice. And we're much more knowledgeable on invasive species, so it's not as worrisome as perhaps maybe 50 years ago, introducing a new species. Smart planting. Similar kind of to crop rotation. Basically, you're going to plant a variety of crops in one area. Okay, so you can see down here, this farm, we have a lot of different vegetables growing in a fairly small area. There's habitat and food for the predators of the pests that way, okay? So in this case, farms like these do not have as many pests just naturally. The drawback is it's not going to be as efficient for large-scale farming to have all these little pockets because things like harvesting and planting are going to take a lot more time. There are some natural and organic pesticides. Most of these are going to be for, again, small-scale farms. Natural solutions like eggshells will keep slugs away. You can actually, spider mites, you can rid them by treating your orchard with salt solution. Just a fence is something that can help as well. But again, a lot of these are not as applicable to large-scale agricultural farms. So in summary, pesticides are widely used. They've helped us solve a number of problems. They've even saved millions of lives. They have also caused some serious problems, though, like pesticide-resistant pests, illness to humans, or endangering some bird populations and other organisms. There are better solutions to conventional pesticides. However, as of now, they're not as practical or cost-effective at this time. Now, I do want to mention this because integrated pest management is a field that's been up and coming, particularly in the last 20 to 30 years. And integrated pest management, it's actually a thing that you can major in college. I think it would be a really fascinating field to get into. But basically, they use a variety of different tactics, and you can kind of see in this pyramid here, they start at the base and they kind of move their way up as needed. Only as a last resort are pesticides used, okay? And they try to use the most benign methods of controlling the pests before resorting to that. Because they use a variety of different tactics, a lot of times it does not damage the ecosystem nearly as much as just traditional blanket application of a pesticide. So let's get that in there. Integrated pest management. It's a system based on prevention, monitoring, and control of pests to eliminate or drastically reduce the use of pesticides. So this is I'm so excited that this field is becoming more and more prevalent, because this is really where agriculture needs to go to be more environmentally responsible. Some examples of what that might look like is, like we said with the ladybug, adding a predator insect to eat the pest insect. In that case, you're going to kind of let nature take care of the issue for you, with a little help from you, obviously. Adding plants that may naturally repel the pests. There are certain plants, whether they give off a certain odor or something, that can repel different pests. So just adding those maybe to the border can be very, very effective. Perhaps the pests live in some sort of shelter habitat, some sort of other plant that's not the crop they live in. If you remove that and they don't have shelter, then you're going to reduce the likelihood that they're going to eat anything out of your crops. So those are just some examples of a variety of tactics that integrated pest management is going to use to really try to solve that problem in the most chemical-free way that they can. Okay, take-home points for today. Pesticides are not all good, nor are they all bad. Number 2, please submit a picture of your notes for your homework assignment to me. And we will be talking about DDT next week. Have a good one, guys.